Peter Mertens is an automotive industry veteran, and he worked in a variety of board roles. One of his roles between 2017 and 2018 has been the head of R&D for Audi, and in that role he has been responsible for critical and important decisions around the e-tron, the first BEV from Audi. He started his career as a toolmaker within a German company and later on went to university, actually 2 universities in Germany. One was Kaiserslautern, the other was in Lemgo, as well as the Virginia Polytechnic Institute in the US. Later on, he owned different roles within automotive companies. One of those has been with General Motors, where he was Global Vehicle Line Executive. Then he went to a management board role with Jaguar Land Rover. The same happened to Volvo cars. Then he went to Audi AG, and he's been also in a leading role within Polestar SA, Sanitue SE, Audi Sports GmbH, Audi China, Volkswagen Financial Services, and others. For health reasons, he later on resigned from his role and is now an investor and member of board at smaller startups. I didn't have the pleasure to talk to him directly, but I'm using an interview he did with Automotor Sports, which is in German and that I'm going to put into the description, to select a few key sentences he was saying, which I would call pretty revealing because they give us a really good understanding about the thought process from Audi, why they decided for the batteries they decided for, and what their thinking is. I believe that talking to an ex-executive from an automotive company is much better than talking to someone who is currently in that role. The reason is simple. People are more open to reveal information about the real truth and doesn't feel the sizzle in the head in terms of adjusting whatever they are saying to the PR and communication department of the board. Peter Mertens made in the long interview a lot of statements and explained what happened and why he believed it happened and how the future may look like. I'm just picking out a few of those and hope that they still give a good information about his thinking and thought process and reveals a little bit in particular about Audi and the e-tron. So when he was asked about his time at Audi from the interviewer, one of the sentences he said, quote, we didn't take the battery technology serious enough, end quote. Another thing he said was, quote, the knowledge about the battery cell is in Europe just existing rudimentary, end of quote. I believe these 2 sentences alone show that he's regretting a little bit that they didn't take the battery technology more serious. In the major part of the interview, he is just talking about battery technology and not electromobility as a whole in terms of context of software development, drivetrain development, battery cell and energy development within the car, and a couple of other things I call critical. So my conclusion here is what he's saying, I believe, is correct. I mean, if the German automakers would have been a little bit earlier in terms of understanding how serious the situation is concerning BEVs, they probably would have put more power into the R&D process to be better off today. But the other story which is striking to me is that even today he doesn't see the whole context of a battery electric vehicle, but just a few elements. When he talked later on about digitalization, he just talked about digitalization and not what kind of influence it does have for BEVs in terms of ICE. So his role has not only been BEVs and the e-tron, he was also responsible for a variety of ICE vehicles, not only at Audi but also at different other automakers like Volvo. Not surprisingly, since the 2 talked about BEVs, he talked also about Tesla quite a bit, and he made an interesting statement, quote, "The progress that Tesla made in the battery technology, you can see with the range and also with the performance data they have compared to all other OEMs." So you could see that this is not going easily over his lips. He also talked quite a little bit about the costs, and he mentioned that previously already Tesla was just using 6% cobalt in the batteries, and that this and how this is very important for the cost structure. I do know from another interview I had personally with the manager that Audi had a logistics problem around 6K too high logistics costs, and I know that they also had with battery cost a challenge, which made the vehicle, the e-tron, pretty expensive, and I'm not sure if they made any money with it, but it was obvious that they have a problem around that. And one area Mertens talked about here was the PPE and MBE platform. So the first PPE is a platform from Porsche. So this is about scaling volumes. And the other one, MBE, is the platform VW is pushing at the moment also in coordination with Ford. So the existing incumbent auto industry in Germany has realized that economy of scale is critical in order to bring the cost down. And anybody who ever talked or listened to Elon Musk knows that he talks about this quite a bit. So you have to scale up large volumes in order to be successful. And this is a big, big problem for the incumbent auto industry in Germany. They have economy of scale for ICE, but not for BEVs. That makes BEVs very expensive. And this is why these platforms have been kind of invented. So VW is trying to get more companies on that platform in order to reduce costs, and Ford seems to be a first one. I'm not convinced about that strategy, to be honest, for a variety of reasons, but I understand where this is coming from. Quote, "From an entire market point of view, battery electric vehicles are still a niche, and Tesla is leading in that niche." End of quote. This is an important sentence simply because he is not just an isolated person. He has a network in the automotive industry in Germany. He knows a ton of people, and this is not just his point of view. Regardless to whom you are talking to, that point always comes up. It's like people are not seeing the future, they are just looking at the past, and often they are talking about the past if they talk about Tesla and not even about present. If you look at the future and even the present, this is not a niche player anymore, and we see this just if we look at the market capitalization. So the market is looking at Tesla very, very much more serious, and in a way that they see it as a heavyweight, while most of the German automotive managers still believe Tesla is, they are leading in battery electric vehicles, but they are just leading in a small niche. At that point in time, the interviewer was asking, but isn't it like that Tesla is way ahead because of the battery technology and what they are doing there? And Peter Mertens did answer this with following sentence, quote, "The small round cell brings a lot of advantages, but also a lot of disadvantages. In fact, she is ahead from a technology perspective because she can take higher internal pressure. Another advantage is that in a case of a crash, she swims and does not move rigid like a pouch or prismatic cell. But if really something happens, it's fireworks, what we all could watch already in the internet. And me as a board member for R&D would never have approved that." So, end quote. That is a strong sentence here. So what he is saying In his role as an Audi R&D head, he came to the conclusion that the cells and the battery technology from Tesla is dangerous, which is surprising to me because if we look at the data that we have, this is just really not the case. I mean, at a later point in time in the interview, he talked about exploding batteries. And we all know, I mean, if you have a little bit technology understanding, you know that batteries burn. They burn long and they burn very hot. So it's hard to get this fire distinguished, but they never explode. There is nothing to explode actually, but he mentioned or said that. On top of this, I'm surprised because the technology that Tesla is using has shown how safe they are, and safety is a very, very, very important factor in developing, producing, and delivering vehicles for Tesla, which can be seen in the data that they publish around accidents and incidents. So there's not really a lot happening compared to other vehicle makers, compared to ICE, for instance. But Peter doesn't really see that, and I don't know why. I mean, the data is clear, the information is available, and I would have hoped that he would have understood that BEVs are much safer and that the cells Tesla is using have more advantages than disadvantages. However, when he was R&D head, he decided against the cell format Tesla is using, and we all know right now the Audi e-tron is using pouch cells from cattle, which is a big issue because first of all they don't get supplied what they need. There's been an allocation done for Porsche Taycan instead of Audi e-tron lately, and not only that this is a bottleneck in terms of suppliers, it's also technology where I have a lot of question marks in terms of improvements for the future, which he already gives to the cell format Tesla is using. So I really have a hard time to follow his argumentation, but I wanted to bring this over here so that everybody hears it. Quote, I say this quite honest, we all did sleep, also the suppliers, maybe even the politicians, but I don't want to step on anybody's feet. We did not take the battery seriously enough, end of quote. So that's what he said already before. My addition here, my comment is, from what I hear, what he's saying, I'm actually not convinced that he's awake now, and that doesn't convince me. Quote, Tesla is not the specialist of battery development. Where they are leading is battery management. There they are clearly leading. End of quote. So that's another one. I'm just struggling to believe that he really understands what Tesla is doing in coordination with Panasonic over the years, as well as with CATL now, all in China, and with addition to scientists like John Dan and others who are really, I believe, helping here. And if you think about Maxwell technology and some other improvements, he talked about the solid-state battery before, but just as something everybody will be kind of in a similar position. So I'm really thinking that he doesn't yet understand where Tesla is. The interviewer asked next about autonomous driving and level 3 within Audi, where the company did spend a lot of marketing dollars and euros in order to push this into the market. The story was around traffic jams mainly, so level 3 for traffic jams in order to do stop and go, which is, for me as a Tesla owner, just very normal already, but Audi is calling this level 3 for unclear reasons, asking me. But however, it was planned to put this in the A8 and it didn't happen. So the interviewer asked about it and whether that has to do with the technology that they couldn't do it or some certification issues. And the answer from him was, quote, it is a mixture. It's technically possible in a certain driving situation to allow autonomous driving of level 3. The question of certification is a different one. We have worked with KBA together and did pioneer work, but you have to be realistic at a certain point in time how far you can push it. End of quote. So what he was trying to say here is a little bit like, yeah, from a technology perspective it was possible, but if you look where this is going to and how long we've been trying to push this, the decision to not put it into the A8 was the right one. So yeah, I mean, that's fine. I'm looking forward to the next vehicle where this probably will come into. What we should expect, though, is that as Audi did it before, this kind of solutions are premium solutions which you just get for premium vehicles like the flagship A8 and not for the normal cars. So even if it works, even if they get the certification from the German authorities, it just will be a very, very slim and small amount of people who will pay for it and use it at the end of the day. So frankly said, I don't see this as competition. And from the videos I've seen, from the Audi videos using that system, I have to be honest, it didn't impress me much. Quote, the combination of performance and consumption is extremely important. The next part Peter described was really interesting, and the interesting part is that a lot what he described is very similar to the approach from Tesla in terms of autonomous driving and full self-driving, but he never ever mentioned Tesla, which is once again pretty odd to me. So he works for smaller startups, and they are working they're working in the field of autonomous driving, and he was explaining why one of the big issues is the consumption of the chips, and that's one of the reasons why the NVIDIA approach will never lead anywhere, simply because the chip is using too much energy. So that was a good one, and I agree also to his approach around you can't rely on high definition maps in order to make autonomous driving work. So that was a little bit a hint to GM Cruise and Waymo. And he also is an advocate of the system. The car needs to understand themselves where it is and what needs to be done. So he believes that LiDAR is required, but in terms of training the data, he talked about artificial data. So this is simulated data and not real data like the data Tesla is using, which is probably because they just don't have a chance to get any real data they can work with. So they have to work with simulated data. And now they call it the right approach. I have personally a lot of doubts about that, simply because in real life situations, you bump into situations you've never seen before with your vehicle. And the only option for an algorithm to learn is to live and work in the real life and not in a simulated box. However, I think that was interesting how he is approaching that, and the idea that smaller startups are solving autonomous driving is compelling. So I have more trust and belief in that. And when he talked, he just talked about the companies he works with at the moment, and he did not even mention anyone from the big automakers, other than he mentioned that they just don't have anything here. So interesting, and I believe we may see good developments coming out of this new startups. Peter was not even mentioning Tesla in terms of autonomous driving. The interviewer brought it up and asked about it, and mentioned the chip that seems to have a very good relationship in terms of performance and energy consumption. And what Peter was saying was, quote, Tesla is light years behind Recogni. The chip is already almost called holy, but it's considered what you really need, not good. End of quote. So a very strong statement. Obviously, he works for a competitor in a certain area. At least, I mean, he probably owns shares too. That's what I guess. And it's fair enough that he's stating that, and he made some statements about the rate, the data processing rate, and he went a little bit deeper into that one. But it was an isolated information for me again, and he did not even mention that the chip, the hardware, is custom made, and what kind of difference this makes for the entire system. So interesting how he looked at it. After he said a little bit about Tesla and criticized certain areas and claimed that his company is further ahead, he turned around and talked very positive. Quote, "This is an area where Tesla has a very clear lead against the German auto industry. They've been the first with over-the-air updates, and they did this partly really very much with media attention. If you think about the hurricane season, and they just added, 10% range on the cars with an over-the-air update, that has been really a spectacle of technology, and I have to say, hat off. All OEMs are by far behind Tesla here. Another area where they differentiate very much is in the high vertical integration. Everything that is important is developed in-house, and I only can touch my own nose here because I made wrong decisions. We trusted too much on our supplier base and that somehow they are going to make it. And that was a really bad development. And Tesla is in this area really a role model. So nothing to add here from my side. I think it's a strong statement from the former head of R&D from Audi, very strong, and it shows appreciation, and I believe it's deserved. Peter Mertens continued talking about vertical integration and indicating that this is not really necessarily needed for all areas. So he said, quote, "I'm having a hard time with that OEMs believe everybody needs to develop its own operating system and puts 10,000 people on it." End of quote. So that's another hint to VW Group, which their big IT department, where they are centralizing 10,000 people and claiming that this will solve the software issues the company has. And Peter made another good point. He continued with comparing to Waymo and other successful companies in terms of automotive software, whereby he said, even Tesla is probably a few thousand developers and Waymo maybe 1,500. And personally, I believe, and this is my belief, not Peter's, that you probably can manage this with just a few hundred people, if at all. Maybe you just need 100 or 50 to be able to manage a real good system. And I'm talking a little bit about my experience here. I've been working 20 years in the software business. This is completely new for automakers on that level. They've been doing software before, but that software has only been a part of the entire ecosystem of the car and of the vehicle. If you want to read more about that, you can wait for my next article on Clean Technica, which I'm planning to publish mid of June. Peter continued talking about Google and Android in terms of using external suppliers for the operating software of vehicles. And he said, these companies are that big that you just don't have a chance really to win against them. And then he said, quote, "If you can't fight them, join them," quote end. So I think that's pretty revealing and clear too. So he is trying to explain to the automotive industry that they won't ever be good software companies, which is a statement you can make. And Tesla has shown it's possible, but Tesla has been from the beginning more a software company than a hardware company, and all the issues and challenges around the building of the chassis and the hardware is just a proof of that. Peter continued talking about the ecosystem of cars quote, is a customer in the future still a customer of Volvo, Audi, Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen, or is he a mobility customer, or is he a customer of Lyft and Uber? End of quote. Peter touched on that before, and I think this is another very critical and important element that he really understands, and I have my doubts that the German auto industry really understands this. It's all about having access to the customer. So if you lose that access to, for instance, as he said, to Lyft and Uber, and there is a huge variety of other services out there, by outsourcing that critical element of your business, you're losing access. And by losing access, you're losing revenue and profit. So I believe this is a critical part of the entire interview here, because it shows what in terms of risk can happen if you don't get it right. Quote, at the end succeed always those who have the largest platform, and it is simply so that at the moment American companies have just that. So he is underlining the power in the US, Silicon Valley mainly, in terms of, he's talking about Microsoft and Apple and you name it, so Google of course and a couple of others, and he's also referring to they are determined, part of them are determined to get autonomous driving right, otherwise they go out of business, which is not, and he doesn't say that, but that's just the logic here. This is not the case for the German and European automakers and other automakers, simply because they have still their ICE business and they can probably survive for a certain period. They're gonna shrink, and this is, by the way, my prediction since a long time, that most of these large companies are going to shrink and gonna be less important than we know them from the past and from today, and other organizations going to have more revenue, more profit, more influence. Interesting topic that he's touching here. He's also repeating that, quote, if you can't beat them, join them. So he is an advocate of some of those companies at least taking the solutions from suppliers. I'm partly critical here simply because the overall challenge that you have in order to get it right is quite complex, and you also have to develop the hardware of your vehicle in terms of making sure that the software works in the right way. I know that this is not the opinion of everybody. There are different approaches in the market, but my belief is that Tesla is doing the right thing here, and they've been showing that you can do it with very limited resources. Given that, we have to ask ourselves why, in particular the German automakers who've been trying to do that, do fail so miserably. We see this in autonomous driving with Audi. We probably have a good autopilot system for traffic jams, but they cancelled it for the A8, and this is not just a postponement, this is a signal, because they talk a lot about regulation, but they also hint to technical challenges they have. And I've been from the get-go, from the start, not convinced about their approach, what they are doing with the vehicles, and that they are just using simulated data, or if at all. And there's also a tendency here in Germany to think about high density maps. So that's also, in my opinion, for a scalable solution, not the right approach. I want to conclude this already long podcast and thank Peter and the guys from Automotor Sports doing this more than an hour-long podcast and interview that they've been publishing in German language, and that I've been trying to convey here in English with the most important parts. It's been revealing, it's interesting, and I believe it shows a lot about the thought process of the automotive industry back in the days when he was still in active board member roles, but also today. I want to conclude with a last quote from Peter, and I don't have to add anything to that quote because it could have been out of my mouth. It's gonna be bloody, and not all will survive.